Total Rock Studios is not interested in denying the design similarities between Back 4 Blood and Left 4 Dead. Valve may own the IP, so they can't call it Left 4 Dead 3, but this is as close as we'll get, a true spiritual sequel. Thankfully, the wait was mostly worth it, and despite some modern mechanics feeling more intrusive than engaging, Back 4 Blood recaptures that addictive core gameplay loop, and the just one more run feeling. As with Total Rock Studios' prior games, the overarching narrative and several flashy cutscenes quickly fade from memory. The bulk of the story is handled in-game, through mission briefings in safe houses, dialogue between the protagonists, comments about the locations they pass through, and environmental storytelling. Unlike Left 4 Dead, Back 4 Blood picks up sometime after the initial collapse, as the remnants of humanity, who are slowly rebuilding, are hit by a sudden resurgence of the parasite-ridden humans and their terrifying mutations. Of course, these ridden share many similarities with the Left 4 Dead roster, down to their behaviors and weaknesses, such as being drawn to noise or weakened by fire. Unfortunately, the move to a more experienced group of cleaners, all of them quirky archetypes that we've seen before, working for a generic military man, does not make for compelling dialogue or interactions. If you're a fan of late 90s or early 2000s action movies, you might enjoy it more, but personally, I found none of the characters as fleshed out or memorable as in Left 4 Dead 1 and 2. There are less genuine interactions, few fleshed out backstories, and very little connection to any of the locations you fight through. To its credit though, it has an actual three-part structure to the campaign, think rescue, rearm and fight back, but I still preferred the discrete scenarios and more unique dialogue in Left 4 Dead and its sequel. Despite the time that's passed since Left 4 Dead 2 launched, describing the basic gameplay loop almost feels redundant, as it's been repurposed for successful titles like Vermintide 2 and World War Z. You team up with 3 other people, or bots, before running and gunning through branching, ridden-infested corridors to the next safe house. To spice things up, you might need to complete a simple objective, think interacting with something or carrying some important object, and sometimes there'll be a dramatic finale that requires you to hold a point for several minutes. Thankfully, Back 4 Blood sticks to the original design template of short, intense sessions between each safe house, ensuring that failed runs are never a major setback or waste your time.
I could use that.
It might sound simple, but it's a timeless formula that still makes for a great cooperative PvE experience, albeit with a slight competitive edge, thanks to the scoring system that tracks several statistics. The level and enemy design also encourage you to stick together, and it rewards teamwork, disincentivizing lone wolf tactics. That said, I'd still always recommend playing with friends if you can. Slaying hordes, adapting to deal with the appearance of a mutated ridden, sharing supplies. In that regard, Back 4 Blood is just as good as its predecessors. Which is not to say the gameplay loop is identical. There seems to be a much stronger focus on the mutated ridden, which come in a greater variety than in the Left 4 Dead games, albeit still filling the same basic roles, along with several boss variants. The basic ridden tend to go down quickly, while the hordes are smaller and usually tied to specific actions, or they have a visible timer that allows you to prepare. To make up for this reduced threat, at least on recruit and veteran difficulties, there's a much higher frequency of mutated ridden. Hell, there were times when I'd hear non-stop mutation callouts for almost the entire stage. Back 4 Blood's campaign is lengthy and diverse, taking you through suburban and rural environments, infested buildings and sewers, over highways and fields, and through some more distinctive locations, like a school, police station, or plane wreckage. The campaign also does a great job of highlighting the power of the card system, occasionally taking you through familiar locations, but with a modifier that drastically altered the experience. The Dark card was a personal favourite, limiting sightlines, highlighting the great dynamic shadows, and ramping up the tension when it introduces a ridden type that'll shriek to alert a horde if you can't coordinate and put it down quickly. On the whole, I enjoyed the card system that modified the environments, ridden variants, buffed the team, or added an optional objective. Think of an extra tough boss, or making it through a stage without alerting the horde. On the other hand, the inclusion of a copper currency to buy items in safe houses, multiple tiers of the same weapon type, weapon modifications, and distinct ammunition types, all felt increasingly extraneous and just detracted from the pacing the longer I played. It was fine when playing solo, but online players could spend ages milling about safe houses, comparing weapon stats, wandering away from the group to search for the right ammo type, or sitting around opening crates mid-horde. Even without these features, Left 4 Dead 2 still had enough weapon diversity. Almost all weapons had distinct strengths and weaknesses, and very few became obsolete over a run. Falling back on bots was an all-too-common experience, and, of course, the only option you have when tackling the solo campaign, Online players can leave runs without penalty in safe houses, so it was common to lose players over time. The bots at least play better than most other games in the genre, but they can still be inconsistent. I've experienced them standing idly by as a horde approached, as their AI only triggered at the last moment, whereas on the other hand I had to walk away during an end-of-act holdout moment. Back 4 Blood doesn't pause during solo play if you're wondering, and return to find they had defended me for the full 5 minutes required. However, despite their ability to point out new weapons, share munitions, use explosives, and prioritize reaching the safe house, they never pick up new gear, and the game doesn't bother to track their stats. As a result, solo players get no competitive scoring experience, nor a comprehensive breakdown of the odds they just overcame. When it comes to the game modes available, the solo variant of the campaign is fine, but somewhat unrewarding, especially in the absence of any local co-op. All the cards are unlocked from the get-go, so it's more like an experimental mode to try out a new deck or a new weapon loadout. Standard online PvE cooperative play is clearly the meat of the game, and provides supply points based on run difficulty and optional objectives completed. These are then used in the hub area, Fort Hope, to unlock several supply tracks and their respective cards for you to work into your deck. You can also use this time to customize your deck, changing the order in which cards are pulled, change gear skins, or mess around with any offensive gear in the firing range, always useful when waiting on your party to gather. This mode appears to use some variant of peer-to-peer, as the host never seems to have lag, and the experience was mostly solid, aside from a few delayed hit markers. PvP multiplayer is, unfortunately, limited to a separate arena-style swarm mode. There is no longer an option to invade another team's campaign and take control of mutated Ridden. Instead, it's a round-based mode, with a point awarded to whichever cleaner team can stay alive longest on a small map, while the other team tries to kill them as mutated Ridden. It has its own card progression system, and discrete decks, along with match-based progression over time, such as higher-tier gear spawn for the cleaners, or mutation points that rack up, and allow players to upgrade their preferred variant of Ridden. It was fine for short bursts of fun, but it has little staying power. There was plenty of lag, several maps feel unbalanced, and once you learn which Ridden is best at dealing with entrenched cleaners, and which locations are best to hunker down in, you find players tend to stick to one strategy. Back 4 Blood can look great in places, especially if you've got an HDR-capable TV, and the performance remains solid throughout. On the current-gen machines, 60 frames per second is the target, and we found both the PlayStation 5 and even the budget Xbox Series S held this, with only some minor screen tearing during stress points. That said, it's still clearly a cross-gen console game, and designed to be scalable on PCs. As such, environments, weapons, characters, the dynamic lighting, and effects all look good, but they clearly aren't pushing any boundaries. What I'd like to see changed is perhaps a less cluttered, more streamlined HUD. What always remained impressive was the audio, be that the voice work, monster sounds, ambience, or music. While I find the character archetypes bland, the voice actors at least capture that action movie spirit. The Ridden sound particularly unsettling and creepy, though I found their distinctive audio cues, always an essential part of surviving in the prior games, were sometimes lost in the sound mix. The music remains subdued and moody most of the time, but it ramps up when you encounter larger foes or during the end-of-act scenarios. Overall, Back 4 Blood is an enjoyable blood-soaked co-op romp. It offers classic but refined gameplay, with some fun card-based modifications, but it is burdened by modern progression systems that simply detracted from the experience once the novelty had worn off. It's a case of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, yet that still places above most of its imitators. As a multiplayer-focused game, with a limited solo campaign, its longevity will ultimately rely on Turtle Rock Studios and Warner Bros. Releasing frequent content updates, and, most importantly, the ability for players to tweak the scenarios on a granular level. I doubt the extensive mod support seen in Left 4 Dead will make it into a cross-platform game, but letting gamers create challenging or wild scenarios, and then share them with others on playlists would be a great start.